Go ahead.
So I talked to my aunt got married about 2 years ago, and at her wedding there was a musician there, and he's not a sound engineer, but he's been studying sound for very long. And he had the thought that if the universe is expanding, like Einstein said, that means the new creation is being made from the expanded universe.
Say that again.
That new creation is forming from the universe expanding.
Okay.
But is it the sound of God that's what's making the universe expand? Because when he said, he just breathed, it says he breathed. Is that initial breath the one thing that's making the universe expand? It's interesting.
That's an interesting thought. Yeah. The physicists won't agree with you, I think, on that one. Okay. But I will tell you this: there are actually the way the physicists look at it, and there's obviously lots of ways to explain something. Okay. If you come to my home and what do you see is some combustion of natural gas, and you see this heat transfer, and you see heat being transferred to water and water boiling, right? And there's a physical explanation to it, right? Or I can just say my wife was making tea for me, right? That's a perfectly good explanation as well. So there's lots of ways to explain things, and physics is not the only way to explain it. Okay? So there's something that God chose to do which resulted in that universe expanding. Whether it was a breath, that I'm not sure, but whatever it is, right? But one very interesting evidence for the Big Bang is something called cosmic background radiation. And the original light from that expansion, as the universe expands, the wavelength of that light also continues to expand. And so for about 40 years they looked for it, and starting in the mid-60s, maybe around the 90s, 92, 93, they actually found that cosmic wave background radiation, which was one of the best predictions. This is what the Big Bang predicted, but no other theory actually predicted. So we have something from the day that the universe started, which we can observe today. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I guess this is also kind of a theoretical question, but I was thinking about it, and whenever you were talking about, in the beginning when God created the earth, basically you said that there was like little to no entropy. Maybe this is like overthinking things, but I guess that's a chronic symptom of engineering. Would entropy possibly be, I guess, either a result or something along the lines of sin, perhaps? Because, if in the beginning when God created the earth there was little to no entropy, if not no entropy, I don't know. This, I guess, is not a very important thing to think about, but this is something I was...
No, actually, a lot of people have theorized about it, if there's a connection between sin and entropy, because, increasing entropy means increasing disorder, increasing chaos, and on some spiritual level, does that connect to sin or not, right? I'm not 100% sure of the answer, but certainly it's worth thinking about, at least for fun, if nothing else, right? What I'll tell you is I have thought about something similar in terms of, we are, as Christians, we say we are sinners, saved by the grace of God. But why are we sinners? Are we sinners after we sin? No, we're sinners, we're born sinners. How are we born sinners? Well, because my theory, is that when Adam sinned and Eve sinned, it affected the genetic code somehow. And then that got propagated. So this is why we are born sinners. It's not like we got to grow up and at some point decide, today, from now on, I'm a sinner, right? It's not like that. We're just born that way, right? And being born that way means everybody's default path is hell. Because we're all born sinners. It doesn't matter if you're born in a Christian family or not, right? Because being born in a Christian family doesn't make anyone a Christian, right? It just means you're born in a Christian family, right? Accepting Christ yourself means you have a relationship with Him, right? So which means if you're born sinners, we're automatically distant from God, right? And so then when we can make a decision, we're at that age where we can make a decision, then we choose to follow Christ, So that's my conspiracy theory about how sin has affected the world. So, yes, sir.
Have you had any interesting interactions with Hindus regarding your faith?
All kinds. When I made the video, so the reason we even got connected is because there was an apologist named Josh McDowell who was very famous. He wrote a book called Evidence That Demands a Verdict. First apologist, in my opinion. You could argue Paul, the Apostle Paul, was an apologist too, But his son Sean McDowell is a professor, and so I was on Sean's show, and that was the show you guys saw, right? And so when we did the show, and then, if you're bored out of your mind, go do this. Go read the comments people have on the show. And you will be shocked. I have never heard this much, never seen this much hate mail in my life. Not that I cared that much about it. Okay? I mean, it's the nature of the game. If you say, hey, here's what I want to speak out, there's going to be people who don't like it, right? But probably the biggest challenge, on somewhat of a positive side that people have coming from the Hindu background is their tendency is to believe not that we would rise to judgment, but that we would get reincarnated, right? And eventually you hit some kind of, I don't know if the right word is this, but something like nirvana, essentially, right? And then you join a cosmic, they call it Brahman, cosmic Brahman. You become part of a cosmic force in a sense, right? To me, that's not eternal hope. Okay, I don't want to be part of a cosmic force. I just want to be myself, right? That's the difference in philosophy. This is why it matters in what we believe, right? The hope is what? That we as ourselves, we have sanctified bodies, right? So my joints won't hurt when I wake up in the morning, right? But we are ourselves. The essence of who we are never dies. That's the hope, right? But being part of a cosmic body, I don't care that much for it. Interesting conversation though, right, with people, but after a while it becomes a debate. Everybody argues, nobody changes their mind, so it's not worth it. Yes, Grace.
Why do you think the idea of reincarnation has such an appeal on people, especially the nation of India, that seems to captivate some nation?
Why does it have an appeal on people? I think perhaps the idea of everybody senses there's this good and evil, and in some way we have to pay for good and evil, right? And reincarnation says if you're evil, you become a worse creature. If you're good, you become a better one, right? And perhaps that appeals to them in that sense, that someone else gets what they deserve. Until that someone else becomes us, right? Then if we get what we deserve, would we be happy with the results or would we be upset about it, right? But most of it, but most of it, in my opinion, is cultural. That's how the cultures have believed. There's a book called The God Delusion, right? Anybody heard of that book? You heard of the book? Yeah. It's by a biologist named Richard Dawkins, okay? He was right about one thing. Cultural gods, in my opinion, are a delusion. Okay? And what I mean by that is when a culture creates a god, right? We had asked ourselves the question, did God create man or did man create God? Right? What we are talking about is God creating man. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? Then God created Adam, right? But when we create a God, that's a delusion in my opinion. Does that make sense? And so, cultural gods are delusions. Then once it started the delusion, it can go off in any which way and there is no way to know which one is true and which one is not true. It sounds very disrespectful. People didn't like it when I said that. I wouldn't have liked it myself when I was atheist or Hindu. Right? Go ahead, yeah.
What is the hardest part about defending your faith in a environment of so many, I guess, intellectuals?
What is the hardest part of living your faith in the midst of all these intellectuals?
Yes.
Is that a question? I think we are very tribal, right? We're easily influenced by the opinions of others. I know I was, right? I didn't become an atheist because I thought about it too much, just that everyone around me was an atheist, right? And I think that's the reason most people are anything, right? Why are you an engineer, right? Either if somebody in your family is engineers, or odds are you're surrounded by people who are thinking the same way of going to engineering school, right? So we tend to make decisions based on the tribe that we are with. It actually is important, I think, to buck the tribe from time to time. Others will never think for ourselves. We'll always leave the thinking to somebody else in the tribe, right? All tribes will have some enforcers, by the way, right? And you don't know who it is. It's just naturally there are some people kind of enforcing the rules of the tribe, and we get into it. So I became a Christian in 2001, right? Before most of you all were born, right? And it was not until 2020 that I felt confident to come out as a professional and say my core identity is Christ, right? And so then that's when I decided to write the book. So that was step one of saying I'm going to put it out there, right? And then over time I started doing some podcasts and so on. And then I realized, one, the impact it had on my own life, because I was finally living out what God was calling me to do. And two, people started reaching out to me, and I started realizing it's not that there were I was even as much reaching out to atheists who had a bunch of questions. I was actually reaching out to a lot of Christians who were all in the closet and finally felt the freedom to come out and say, I'm a Christian. If I lose my job, I lose my job. Right? The early Christians, right? The church fathers, as they call it, the group after the apostles, they had a creed, and the creed was this: you can kill me, but you can't hurt me. Right? And so that's somewhere along the way I came to the conclusion. Not that I want to get killed or hurt, but so afraid of the tribe. Why was I so afraid of the tribe? Right? That was the hardest part. That's the hardest part you will face too. It's not the questions people ask you about how do you explain good and evil, if there is a God. No, it's never the intellectual questions. Okay, I'm in sales, by the way. I have a colleague here, we're both in sales. First rule of sales: find out the question behind the question. It's never the question anyone asks you, it's the question behind it. And you got to dig to find out what that question is. Right? So when people throw out intellectual questions, the real question is something else. Right? And so I said, if I didn't stand up and speak, then no one else will. We'll all say somebody should stand up and speak, but not us. Right?
Well, I think on that note, we might end it.
Thank you
for your time with us.
Thank you.